Hello, my dear students. Today we're gonna start reviewing the code of our theme, trying to correct some security vulnerabilities. In the lessons that follow, my explanation will be a mix of theory and practice. In the theoretical part, I'm gonna show you what we have done on the theme to correct some sanitization issues on data input. In fact, we have already done all the necessary sanitization work on the theme in previous lessons, and I'll show you where, why, and how it was done. As for validation, we don't have cases where we need to validate something on our theme. Maybe that will be the case if you had some HTML form that accepted data entered by the user via front end, but that's not our case. In the practical part, in the next lesson, we're gonna do something that hasn't been done so far, which is the escaping of the fields that are shown to the user in HTML or dynamically inside PHP tags, or even in the translation that we have created earlier in this course. Let's start with the, say, more theoretical part. So first, validation. WordPress and PHP itself have a number of validation functions that can help you guarantee that data given to your code is in the correct format. And their usage will depend a lot on the type of data you need to validate. We have even used some of them in our code, but not exactly to validate data entry. So here I have an article from WP-MU Dev. It's talking about creating a custom contact form, something you hardly need to create in WordPress due to the amount of good plugins that are available for free. But here in this post, at a given point, the author starts talking about field validation. First, he explains why you need this. As we can never trust the type of data that the user will enter, the validation process is essential. For contact forms, the problem is even worse. It's worse because you still have to ensure that the one using the form is really a human being, not a robot. So I'll leave you the link of this article in case you want to learn a little bit more about the subject. As I have already told you, we don't have many opportunities here in our theme where we need to validate data input. So it's hard for me to show this in practice for now. Actually, you also find very few opportunities to put this into practice while developing your own theme, unless you decide to really create a very robust, a very future-rich theme. In this case, I think you will probably need to create a couple of plugins for the theme. In this particular case, you need to learn a lot about validation because creating plugins sometimes is all about validating fields. For now, what I'm going to do is I'll make available to you a post from the official WordPress documentation about the subject. There you can find other useful examples of functions used for data validation in case you need to apply it to your theme. So now let's move on to the sanitization functions. Well, sanitization functions help us make data input more secure to be used in a given context. For example, I want my database to get only text from a certain field. So I have to make sure that the data given by the user has a text-only format and never contain information that can later be interpreted as code. Remember the case of little Bob tables? If our friends at the school had ensured that all the student name field didn't contain code, no one would have been able to enter an SQL command through the from field. We used many sanitizing functions in the file that register the customizer fields. Let's open the file up just for you to remember. Well, here are all our fields. And you remember that in the settings we pass an argument called sanitize callback. All the values we have here in the code are WordPress sanitizing functions or functions that we had to create ourselves to sanitize data input. For example, here in the copyright field, which was the first one we created, I passed the sanitize text field function. This function takes everything you type in a field, removes all tags, white space from the start and end of the string, and removes extra white space. It also removes tabs, line breaks, and most importantly, it converts all less than characters into HTML entities, among other things, so that they are not understood as code. By the way, here in Customizer, we can understand a little better the difference between data validation and data sanitization. So, why do we use sanitization here? Well, it's because the goal here is not so much to block the user from entering data in a wrong format. For example, let's suppose I had a field used for sending an email address. If we used email validation, I could block the user from sending the information because they could give me a totally invalid email address. That's not what we want. The goal here is always accept the information given by the user. I don't stop them from sending the information, but the information they give me could be changed before being sent to the database, right? Email fields are a great way to understand this difference. Pay attention. While email validation can completely reject the information given by the user because it may not be in the form of a valid email, email sanitization is quite different. When I sanitize an email, I get the information given by the user and only remove the characters that are not allowed in an email. Alright? However, the theme customizer doesn't work well with validation functions. That's why the correct function to use, for example, in an email field is sanitize email rather than is email, which is a validation function. So we never use validation here, okay? We always use sanitization. Well, I hope that all made sense to you. So let's continue. Other sanitization functions that we find here. This one here, for example, apps_int. This one is a native WordPress function. It's a combination of two PHP functions that check first if the number is an integer and two if it's positive. And its purpose is to remove everything that doesn't fit these two cases, if the number is the integer and if it's positive. Another one, askURL_raw. This one is an escaping function, but it can also be used as a sanitizing function. Actually, some escaping functions can be used here, okay, because they also help us sanitize content. This is the case of askURL_raw. And here at the end, we have a custom sanitization function, which we must create to ensure that the field value would only return true or false. Of course, there are many other functions, and I'll leave the link to the WordPress documentation where you can find others. There are functions that sanitize file names, HTML classes, post slug, etc. Moreover, it's always possible to create your own sanitization function. You'll have to keep only one question in mind. What kind of data is allowed in your field? Based on that, you can create a kind of function to filter only what we want. Well, in the next lesson, I'll come back. Let's move on to the practical part of the explanation. We'll be escaping a lot of fields we have in our theme. So, until then.